10 years ago, they said I was unstable, missing, maybe even dead. Today I stood at my sister's wedding in Ridgefield smiling as her maid of honor gasped, "You're alive." While everyone toasted to a perfect family, I walked up to the mic and wished them all the courage to face what they buried. Moments later, the FBI walked in and called my father's name. As they cuffed him mid-ceremony, he screamed, "This is your fault." I simply said, "Number, the truth did. If you've ever been erased by the people meant to protect you, stay with me. I'm Caroline Whitman, and this is how I came back from the dead with the law on my side." I hadn't planned on walking through those doors. Not really. For weeks, I told myself I'd delete the email, ignore the photos that leaked online, pretend I hadn't seen the wedding registry under her name. But I came. And when the mahogany doors to the Ridgefield Country Club ballroom opened, every molecule of air seemed to pause. People turned. Not everyone. Just a few at first. A woman near the back blinked hard like her mind refused what her eyes were telling her. A man whispered something to his wife, her gaze following mine like a slow tide. I held my breath and took another step forward. The chandeliers were warm and golden, casting soft halos over tables dressed in cream linens and blush florals. The string quartet was finishing a version of Canon in D. Everything looked picture perfect. Except it wasn't. I spotted her before she saw me. Sienna. My little sister. In white lace and crystal, her smile wide as she greeted guests one by one. Her hair pulled into a low bun just like Mom used to wear. She hadn't changed much. Just polished. Carefully arranged. Like a life staged for someone else's camera. I hadn't said her name out loud in 10 years. Then I felt a hand touch my arm. I turned. Claire. I hadn't seen her since college. Maid of honor sash across her shoulder. Her mouth parted as if she were about to say my name, but no sound came. Instead, a breathless whisper escaped. "You're alive." Her words weren't loud, but they sliced through the room like glass. I didn't answer. I just gave her a small nod. Her hand dropped from my arm slowly, like it had forgotten what it was doing there. More eyes turned. I could feel it ripple outward. Tables of cousins, distant relatives, colleagues, maybe. Whispers rising like smoke. I walked further into the room, each step steady, measured, defiant in its quiet. The heels I wore were second-hand, but they made the right sound on the marble floor. I caught Mom's gaze. She looked directly at me and froze mid-laugh. Her wineglass tilted slightly. Dad was a few feet behind her, caught in conversation with someone who now stared past him. They hadn't expected this. Of course they hadn't. According to them, I had vanished. According to them, I had been too fragile, too unstable, too ungrateful. According to them, I no longer existed. I moved closer to the center of the room where the ceremony would begin in just minutes. There was a faint floral scent in the air, like roses and something citrusy. I hadn't smelled anything like that in years. Then it happened. Sienna turned. She was holding a bouquet, laughing at something the groom whispered in her ear. Her eyes swept across the guests casually until they landed on me. She stopped. Her mouth opened. Her body stilled, bouquet lowering slightly. Our eyes locked. I hadn't meant to look like a ghost. I wore navy, not black. My hair was down, makeup soft, but her expression, shock, disbelief, fear, even told me that to her I might as well have risen from the ground. A murmur swept across the front row. The officiant glanced from Sienna to me, confused. Her fiancé reached for her hand, but she didn't move. My heart thudded once hard, but I stood still. I watched her chest rise as if she couldn't quite catch her breath. Then she took a step back. It was subtle. A single step. But I saw it. Claire quickly moved toward her, touching her elbow, whispering urgently. Sienna shook her head. I couldn't hear what she said, but I didn't need to. Her face said everything. She hadn't thought I'd come. She hadn't thought I could. She had no idea who I had become. And now it was too late to hide. Too late to erase me again. Too late to pretend I was never there. I walked to the side aisle and sat near the back, folding my hands in my lap, eyes never leaving the front. From here I could see them all. The family that pretended I never existed. The guests who would soon learn what they weren't meant to know. And the sister who once watched me disappear without a word. Let them squirm. I wasn't here for their comfort. I was here to watch it all come undone. I glanced down at my hands, the same hands that had written legal arguments in a tiny apartment in D.C. The same hands that had signed rental contracts, job applications, and one long lonely birthday card to myself for year 29. These hands had built a version of me no one here knew. I had come back not as the daughter they discarded. I came back as the woman they never saw coming, and in less than an hour everything would change. I was 18 the night my name vanished. The house was too quiet for a Friday. No laughter from the television room, no clinking silverware from the kitchen. Just the low hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the hardwood beneath my socked feet. We were all seated at the long walnut dining table, the one my parents had shipped from Vermont because Mom believed everything meaningful should be handcrafted. Sienna had just turned 16. She sat across from me scrolling on her phone between bites of salad. Mom poured a second glass of wine. Dad, doctor. Warren Whitman, head of the Ridgefield Women's Health Center, recited an anecdote from work, voice calm assured, always a little too smooth. Then he said it. The thing that cracked whatever spell had held me in place all these years, he described a patient. 17. Scared, alone. Wanting to keep her pregnancy. And how he had, in his words, helped her see reason. Persuaded her, he said. Gently. Firmly. Because he knew better. I dropped my fork. Everyone looked at me. You forced her, I said. Dad's smile froze. He tilted his head slightly the way he did when diagnosing someone he thought was overreacting. I didn't force anyone, he said. She told the nurse she cried through the whole thing. That she begged to leave. I read the intake notes. You pushed her. His face changed then. Not anger at first. Control. Cold, polished control. That's confidential. You went through private files. I was interning at the clinic. I'd been curious. I wanted to understand why so many girls came out of his office looking hollow. Now I knew. I thought Mom would step in. That she'd say something, anything, but she just looked down, slicing her salmon into small, perfect pieces. You don't know what you're talking about, Caroline, she said quietly. Sienna was still on her phone, barely paying attention. As if none of this had weight. As if I hadn't just accused our father of medical coercion at the dinner table. Dad stood up. Slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. If you're going to make baseless accusations against your own family, you don't belong at this table. My mouth went dry. You're really going to pretend nothing happened? That it's fine, he pointed toward the hallway. Go to your room. I didn't move. He stepped closer, then get out. I thought it was just a threat. That Mom would stop him, or Sienna would say something, or this was one of those awful moments that passed and faded like a bruise. But no one said a word. So I packed 2 trash bags, a duffel. I took my phone, a charger, $200 from a savings account I'd barely touched. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked out the front door of the Whitman house and down the driveway into the cold April night. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I realized how deep the erasure would go. My number was blocked. Emails bounced. Friends from high school stopped replying. One day I went to the pharmacy to refill my asthma prescription. The clerk said my insurance was no longer active. I called the provider. They said I was removed from the family plan. No explanation. A few months later I applied for college housing. They asked for emergency contacts. I wrote down my best friend's mother. I didn't even try to write down Mom or Dad. It got stranger. A former neighbor told me my parents had said I'd had a breakdown. That I'd been taken to a facility, that I'd run away during treatment. Someone else mentioned a rumor that I had moved to Europe and cut all ties. Another said I had been hospitalized and lost touch with reality. And no one, not a single person from my past, reached out to ask me directly. It was like I had died. Except I was alive. I rented a studio in Bridgeport with water stains on the ceiling and a sink that gurgled every night. I worked at a diner. I cleaned rooms at a motel. I saved what I could and applied for every scholarship that didn't require parental tax returns. I got into community college. Then transferred to a university in DC. Law school came later. Piece 5, painful piece. I rebuilt myself. And all the while the Whitmans lived their glossy, edited lives. Sienna Maid valedictorian. Mom ran charity luncheons. Dad kept his medical license. I kept receipts. Every rumor, every lie, every contact I quietly traced. Claire, Uncle Neil, a nurse from the clinic. Even a former patient who sent me a handwritten letter thanking me for trying to speak up. I didn't plan revenge. Not at first, I just wanted to survive. But when I heard about the wedding, something shifted. 10 years. 10 years of pretending I never existed. Of telling people I was crazy, lost, unstable. Of erasing me so thoroughly that even Claire, who once braided my hair at sleepovers, looked at me today like she'd seen a ghost. And maybe I was one. Not the kind that haunts, the kind that returns. A woman in a navy dress. Sitting at the back of the room. Watching it all. Remembering. Waiting. Let them say what they want. I knew the truth, and soon they would too. I woke up at 5 a.m. to the sound of a garbage truck outside my window. The room was barely larger than a closet and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was mine. I slid off the futon and pulled on my uniform. The diner opened at 6, and if I was late, Hank would dock my pay again. The first few months after I left Ridgefield were a blur of hunger and concrete floors. I slept behind a church, at first tucked into the back lot where nobody saw me. One night it rained so hard the cardboard I used for insulation disintegrated under my back. I remember thinking, this is how people freeze to death. I was 17 and didn't own a coat. A priest named Father Andrew found me there 2 days later. He didn't ask questions, just offered a spare cot in the church basement and a warm meal. He also gave me a pamphlet for the local library's adult education program. The library saved me. It was warm, quiet, and nobody cared that I hadn't brushed my hair. I signed up for GED prep and studied every night after work. I read textbooks until my eyes stung. I learned how to type and practiced essays on old desktop computers with sticky keys. When the librarian Mrs. Downey saw my test scores, she said I should think bigger. She helped me apply to state universities and even paid the postage. By the spring of the following year, I got a letter that made me sob. In the middle of the bus stop, I'd been accepted to the University of Vermont with a partial scholarship. I took it without hesitation. I had nothing to lose. College was hard. I still worked weekends and took on campus jobs restocking the dining hall. I didn't talk much. I was the girl who sat in the back, hair pulled tight, scribbling every word the professor said. I didn't go to parties. I didn't drink. I couldn't afford distractions. What I could afford, though, was a dream. In my second year, I transferred to Georgetown after winning a writing competition about ethics in medicine. The essay was about my father, though I never mentioned his name. I wrote about a patient's right to informed consent, about the silence of power and the bravery it took to speak against it. That essay got me a full scholarship. I arrived in Washington, D.C. with one duffel bag and a heart full of panic. But it was there I met Claire. She sat next to me in constitutional law and whispered a snarky comment about the professor's obsession with John Locke. I tried not to smile, but she caught me. "You're too serious," she said after class. "You look like you read legal code for fun." "I do," I replied. She laughed like that was the most charming thing she'd ever heard. Claire was the first person I told about my past. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough for her to know I wasn't just some overachiever from Vermont. She didn't flinch. She brought me cupcakes on my birthday and dragged me to a movie theater for the first time in years. For the first time since I was thrown out, I felt like a person again. It was during finals week of our second year that I saw the headline. Prominent OB/GYN accused of coercion in patient lawsuit. I froze. The article named Dr. Warren Whitman of Ridgefield Medical Associates, my father. The plaintiff, a woman in her early 20s, claimed she had been misled into a surgical abortion she didn't want. That she had never given full consent. That she'd been rushed and pressured. That the doctor never informed her of alternatives. My stomach turned. Claire leaned over. "What's wrong?" I closed the laptop. "Just a bad memory." But it wasn't just a memory, it was real. It was happening again. Someone else had found the courage to speak. And now the whole world might listen. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the look in my father's eyes the night he called me delusional. The way my mother refused to look at me as I packed my things. The way Sienna cried but never said a word. If this woman went forward with the case, there would be hearings, depositions, discovery, records, evidence. I had kept quiet for 10 years. But maybe it was time to open the file I never thought I'd touch again. In the bottom of my bag was a flash drive. I had copied it years ago, back when I still had access to the home computer in my father's study. It contained patient logs, appointment summaries, audio memos he had dictated. I didn't know what all of it meant. But now maybe I could figure it out. Claire walked in as I stared at the screen. "What are you doing?" I turned the laptop toward her, reading up on old sins. She sat beside me, her expression sober. "You don't have to do this alone." I didn't say thank you, but I didn't close the file either. The next day I emailed a professor from medical ethics. I told her I wanted to do an independent study on malpractice litigation. I didn't say why, but I think she knew. I was no longer the girl in the church basement. I was a law student with access to the truth. And this time I wouldn't be shut down with a scream across the dinner table. I was ready to dig. And I knew exactly where to start. I started with the name I hadn't spoken in years. Dr. Warren Whitman. My father. I typed it into the medical board's disciplinary database late at night in my shared apartment in Queens. Nothing came up. No suspensions, no malpractice rulings. No public complaints. Clean as a whistle. Too clean. I switched over to public court records and searched by the hospital's name instead. Whitman Ridge Women's Health Center. That turned up a few civil suits, but most were settled quietly. No verdicts, no headlines, just whispers buried in redacted PDF files and closed doors. That didn't surprise me. My father had built his career on the illusion of compassion. But I knew the truth. I had seen it in that girl's eyes 10 years ago. The girl whose tears stained our dinner table. The girl he silenced. I printed everything I found and slipped the pages into a plain manila folder labeled W. Then I did what I'd been trained to do. I started connecting dots. Every week after work I took the train to Connecticut, but not to Ridgefield. I avoided that town like it was radioactive. Instead, I visited local libraries in nearby counties, combing through microfilm and archives. I read small-town papers, checked obituaries, even attended public hearings at the state medical board whenever they discussed complaints against OB-GYNs. It took months. But one night in a basement archive of a regional newspaper, I found something. It was a short article dated July 2017. A woman named Denise Harrow had filed a complaint against a doctor at Whitman Ridge. She claimed her daughter's medical consent had been falsified. The name of the doctor, not Warren Whitman. It was someone I didn't recognize. But I kept reading. The article said the original physician on the case was unavailable and that the substitute doctor denied signing the forms. The hospital had dismissed the complaint, citing clerical confusion. The story didn't go further. No follow-up, no lawsuit, no closure. But I knew what I was looking at, a ghost signature. My father's signature forged under another doctor's name. I copied the snippet and took it home. Back in New York, I showed it to my supervisor Jessica at the nonprofit. She had a sharp legal mind and an even sharper instinct for abuse of power. "This is suspicious," she said, flipping the page, "but we need more. A pattern. Multiple victims. Otherwise, it's just smoke." I nodded. Then I told her the rest. About Ridgefield. About being kicked out. About my father. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. "We'll help you," she said. "But you're going to need to do this smart. Clean. By the book." So I built a case file, patient aliases, doctor schedules, hospital rosters. Anything I could get through public access laws. I drafted FOIA requests under a different name. I even posed as a research student gathering data on medical ethics cases. Most hospitals ignored me. But one clerk in New Haven was new and didn't know better. She sent me scanned intake logs from 2015 and there it was. Denise Harrow's daughter had been admitted under Dr. Warren Whitman. The same day the forged signature appeared under another doctor's name. Got you. I scanned the handwriting and compared it to my father's old prescriptions. They matched. I called Jessica. We've got forgery. She exhaled. That's a felony. But the statute of limitations on civil suits might be running out. We need someone willing to speak up. Can you find Denise? I tried. Her phone was disconnected. Her old address had a new tenant. I sent a letter, weeks passed. No response. But I didn't stop. I looked deeper. One night I found a closed Facebook group for survivors of medical coercion. I requested to join. The admin messaged me first. Why do you want in? Because I lived through it, I typed, and I'm trying to stop it from happening again. She let me in. That's where I saw the second post. Another woman. Different year. Same hospital, same story. And this one, she named the doctor. Warren Whitman. She said she'd tried to sue but was told the medical record didn't support her claim. Her chart had been lost. She had no proof. But I did. I messaged her. Told her I was a lawyer. That I believed her. That she wasn't alone. She agreed to meet. We sat at a diner in Bridgeport on a cold Sunday morning. Her name was Camille. She was 27 now, but she had been just 19 when it happened. I told her what I found. Showed her the signatures. Her hands trembled. They told me I was confused, she whispered. My own parents believed them. Do you want to fight this? Her eyes burned. I do now. That's when I knew I wasn't just chasing revenge. I was building something. A reckoning. As the case files grew thicker, so did the silence from Ridgefield. It was like the whole town had been trained to forget me. Friends from high school never returned messages. Former neighbors acted like I never existed. I once saw a classmate at a legal conference in Boston. She blinked twice, then turned away. I wasn't offended. I was used to being a ghost. Until now. I had always thought revenge would feel like fire. But, in that moment, it felt like ice. Controlled, sharp, unstoppable. And I wasn't done yet. I met Linda Calderon on a gray Tuesday in late October. She walked into our office in Queens, holding a file folder to her chest like it was a lifeline. Her eyes were hollow, like someone had emptied them out and forgotten to fill them again. She was 35, a waitress at a small diner in Yonkers, and had gotten pregnant with her first child earlier that year. Everything had been fine until her second trimester. That's when she'd been referred to a prestigious women's health facility in Stamford. I knew the place immediately. Whitmore Medical Center. My father's name was still listed on their website under Senior Ethics Advisor. Linda had been pressured into taking a medication she didn't understand. When she hesitated, a doctor told her it was standard procedure and implied her refusal might endanger her baby. Days later, she miscarried. No clear reason. No follow-up. Just a cold apology from a nurse and a bill for $6,000. I took the file from her hands and saw the name of the doctor who signed off on the treatment, Dr. Nolan Chase. I'd seen that name before, twice. We filed a formal claim with the hospital. Their legal team responded with a 30-page denial and an offer to settle for $10,000. It was a classic tactic. Guilt money wrapped in legalese. Linda looked at me across my desk. Her voice shook when she said, I don't want money. I want someone to admit they killed my baby. I promised her we'd fight. The next 6 months became a blur of depositions, discovery, battles, and long nights buried in medical transcripts. But with each week our case grew stronger. 3 other women contacted us with similar stories, all involving Dr. Chase. One of them still had the pill bottle. It hadn't been approved for use in pregnant patients. At the hearing, Linda sat quietly as we played the audio recording she'd captured from one of her appointments. Dr. Chase was heard saying, "Just take the damn thing. I don't have time to explain it every time a girl gets cold feet." When the judge ordered a full review and referred the case to the state medical board, Linda burst into tears. The court had not yet ruled on damages, but she had already won something far greater: acknowledgement. Later that evening, I sat alone in my office with the hospital's response documents spread out before me. I was searching for any indication of who had authorized Dr. Chase to use that medication. My father's name never appeared directly. But I noticed something else. Several internal review memos were signed by a pseudonym I had once seen scribbled in the margins of a document on my father's desk. W. Elias. My father's middle name was Elias. Warren Elias Whitman. I leaned back in my chair, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. It wasn't solid proof, but it was enough to push me forward. Claire stopped by the office around midnight, bringing takeout and a bottle of ginger beer. She sat on the couch watching me with concern as I showed her what I'd found. "He's still pulling strings from the shadows," I said. She frowned, tapping the folder. "This isn't just about Linda anymore, is it?" I shook my head. Number. It never was. When I left home, I was 18, furious and lost. Now I was 28, armed with a law degree and a quiet fire that burned steadier than rage. The past 10 years had been an excavation of everything they buried me under. And now I was pulling bones from the ground. Claire watched me for a long moment, then said, "Do you think Sienna knows?" I paused. My sister. The last memory I had of her was the day I was thrown out. She'd been crying. Not fighting. Not stopping them. Just crying. Maybe. Maybe not. But if she's marrying someone like Dad, she needs to know exactly what she's walking into. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. An invitation with gold foil letters. Sienna Whitman and Tyler Brennan. The 14th of June, Ridgefield Country Estate. It was happening. And for some reason Claire had been invited. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" I smiled, tired and cold. "I think I need a dress." Linda's case had set a precedent. Her victory became a ripple, and in that ripple I saw names I recognized from old family Christmas cards. Donors. Trustees. Men who shook my father's hand and called him a pillar of the community. They had turned their backs on the truth, just as they'd turned their backs on me. But now the truth was writing subpoenas. The next morning I got a call from a nurse named Mallory, who had once worked at Whitmore. She said she saw my name in the news and had something to share. A memo, a real one. Not a fake. With initials WEW, I met her at a coffee shop in Stamford. She handed me the photocopy, her hands trembling. "You didn't hear this from me," she said. I scanned the paper. The memo was dated May 2015, just weeks after I had been kicked out. It approved the use of an unapproved drug for case-by-case off-label administration in second trimester complications. Signed, WEW. My heart dropped. It was him, his initials. His authority. His cold detachment. He had risked lives with a stroke of his pen. I looked up at Mallory, her eyes full of quiet fear. "They covered it up, didn't they?" she whispered. "Yes. And they used my disappearance as a smokescreen." I left the coffee shop with shaking hands and an iron resolve. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about all the women like Linda. It was about the truth they tried to erase. And most of all, it was about me. I wasn't just the girl who left. I was the woman who came back, and I was just getting started. The email came on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of drafting a response for a patient abuse claim when I saw the sender's name. Sienna Whitman. My sister. I stared at it for a solid minute, blinking, rereading, thinking it had to be a glitch or a sick joke. But it was her. The subject line was just one word. Sorry. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit in my inbox unopened, glowing like a wound I wasn't ready to look at. My hands were trembling. Claire noticed. She paused her call with a client, looked over, and mouthed, "Everything okay?" I nodded, even though everything inside me was unraveling. After 10 years of complete silence, why now? Why after they let me disappear without a trace? After they told everyone I was unstable, missing, probably dead, I finally clicked it open during lunch. "Caroline, I don't know how to say this right, so I'll just say it. I saw your name in an old Georgetown article someone posted about scholarship recipients. It hit me like lightning. You're alive." You're alive and thriving, and I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I wanted to tell you I never forgot you. I didn't know the full story back then. I believed what they told me. That you'd snapped, that you needed to be away for everyone's safety. I was young, confused, scared. And I regret it every single day. I'm getting married in 3 weeks. His name is Darren. He's kind and patient and nothing like the men Dad tried to set me up with. I don't expect you to come, but I'd like to invite you. I'd like to make this right, even a little. Love, Sienna. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. My gut was tangled in too many knots to sort through at once. Part of me wanted to throw my laptop across the room. Another part wanted to believe her. Wanted to reach through time and hold the little sister who used to braid my hair when Mom wasn't looking. Claire was watching me carefully now. She didn't say anything until I shut my laptop. That from her, I nodded. What are you thinking? I don't know yet, I said. But maybe this is the opening I need. She raised her eyebrows. To what? To finish what I started. I didn't respond to Sienna right away. I forwarded the email to my work address, flagged it. Then I called Marcus, one of the investigators we worked with for medical malpractice cases. I need you to dig into something. Personal this time. Whatcha got Warren Whitman. Former OBGYN had consulting privileges at Danbury Regional for over 2 decades. I need every scrap of dirt. Allegations, settlements, off-the-record complaints. Especially anything in the past 15 years. Marcus let out a low whistle. You sure? I'm positive. He didn't ask why. Marcus never asked why. That was what made him good. I replied to Sienna's email 2 days later. Sienna, I got your message. I appreciate you reaching out. I'll think about coming. Caroline, that was it. No warmth. No forgiveness. But it was enough. The next week Marcus sent me a secure file transfer. The folder was thicker than I expected. It included reports from nurses who'd left Danbury citing moral concerns, 3 anonymous complaints to the state board, and 1 handwritten letter from a woman in her 50s who claimed Dr. Whitman forged her signature on a late-term termination document. But what stopped me cold was the attachment marked federal. It was a copy of a subpoena. The Department of Justice had opened a quiet inquiry into a cluster of suspicious terminations linked to a now-defunct women's clinic. Guess who'd been a paid consultant for over 6 years? My father. The subpoena was dated 7 months ago. It had flown completely under the radar. I sat back in my chair, my pulse thudding in my ears. This wasn't just about ethics anymore. This was criminal. And if I played this right, walking into that wedding wasn't just a statement. It could be the first step in dismantling everything they built on lies. I pulled out my planner, flipped to the wedding date. 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks to prepare. To get the evidence straight. To gather witnesses. And to make sure the day my sister said I do would be the day our father said goodbye to the life he stole. Claire knocked lightly on my office door. You okay? I nodded slowly. I think I'm going to the wedding. Claire blinked. Seriously? Yeah. She waited, then smiled just a little. You're not going for the cake, are you? Not unless it's served with justice on the side. She laughed. I didn't. Later that night, I stared at the ceiling of my tiny Brooklyn apartment and thought about the last time I'd seen my sister. Her face pale as I was dragged out of the house, her voice silent. Her eyes full of something like guilt or maybe just fear. I whispered into the dark. You wanted me gone, but I'm coming back, not as the ghost you buried, but as the storm you never saw coming. And with that, I opened my laptop, drafted a fresh case memo, and started outlining the argument that could destroy a man's career and redeem everything they stole from me. I stepped off the train at Ridgefield Station just after noon. The sky was overcast as if the town itself had gone dull in my absence. I clutched my coat tighter around me, not because of the chill, but because of the weight of returning to a place that had spent a decade pretending I no longer existed. Walking past the small cafe on Birch Avenue, I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Elkins, our old neighbor, through the window. Her spoon froze midair. Our eyes locked for a second too long before she dropped her gaze and stirred her tea as if nothing had happened. No smile, no recognition. Just silence. As if she had seen a ghost. I passed by the grocery store where I once begged my mom for bubblegum and where Sienna and I used to buy ice cream after school. Two clerks stood outside chatting. One of them glanced at me, nudged the other. The second one looked over, squinted. Their conversation faded into a hush. It was the same block. The same buildings. The same people. But I had become invisible. The Whitman family estate hadn't changed much. The hedges were still perfectly trimmed, the lawn looked professionally maintained, and the front porch was decorated with white lilies and satin ribbons. A sign near the driveway read, "Welcome to the Whitman Rose wedding weekend," in calligraphy. I stood on the sidewalk for a full minute before walking up the path. The front door was already open. Laughter and clinking glasses spilled out into the front yard. I stepped inside. No one turned. No one gasped this time. But there was a subtle shifting of air. A tremble in energy. The kind that comes when a ripple appears in a perfectly still pond. I found the guest room assigned to me in the far west wing of the house. It had been hastily cleaned. No flowers. No welcome card. A lone towel folded at the foot of the bed like I was a last-minute obligation. I unpacked my bag slowly, methodically, letting each motion remind me of why I was here. Downstairs, the rehearsal dinner prep had already begun. Servers dressed in black buzzed through the kitchen, and a florist was shouting about a missing arrangement. I moved through the noise like a shadow. No one asked who I was. No one greeted me. I saw my mother near the dining room, giving orders with a champagne flute in her hand. She looked radiant. Not a day older than I remembered. And not a glance in my direction. She brushed past me, calling for someone named Vanessa, and didn't flinch when our shoulders nearly touched. The sting of her silence burned hotter than any insult. Sienna floated into the room wearing a pale gold robe, her hair in loose curls. She looked like a painting. Her voice carried laughter, compliments, the effortless charm she'd always wielded. When our eyes met across the room, her face didn't change. Not a flicker. Not a crack. She turned away. I almost laughed. They had all mastered the art of forgetting me. Even with me right in front of them. It wasn't until I slipped into the back kitchen for some water that I saw her. Claire. She stood near a tray of petites fours, scribbling on a checklist. Her head tilted slightly when I entered. Then she froze. She turned slowly. Her brows pulled together. Rebecca. The name hit me like a thunderclap. No one had called me that in 10 years. I blinked. Claire took one cautious step forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Is that really you?" I didn't respond. Just stared at her, letting the silence answer for me. Her mouth parted slightly, eyes scanning my face for confirmation. "I thought you were." She began, then stopped herself. Her hands trembled as she lowered her clipboard. I shrugged gently. "I get that a lot." Claire's eyes glistened. But then she glanced toward the hallway, toward the crowd. She stepped back, lowering her voice again. "Do they know?" I tilted my head. "That depends on what you mean by they and know." Her throat bobbed. She looked down, then back at me. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "Safe for who?" She didn't answer. I stepped closer, keeping my tone even. "Do you still believe in right and wrong, Claire?" Her face twisted into something unreadable. The corners of her mouth tightened. She didn't reply. I walked away before she could say anything else. Later that evening, as I stood at the edge of the patio where fairy lights hung from every tree, I watched the family swirl around me like I was nothing more than fog. Their laughter echoed, their champagne flowed, their toasts soared. They thought the past was buried. But ghosts don't stay buried. And I had come home to haunt. People say ghosts don't make noise. But that's not true. I could feel every stiletto heel click against the marble floor as I walked into the Ridgefield Grand Hall, like I had every right to be there. Because I did. My heels echoed like a countdown. 1, 2, 3. I passed the floral arch where Sienna would say her vows in an hour. The hydrangeas were fresh, expensive, overcompensating. Claire spotted me first. She was across the room near the escort cards, wearing pale green satin and holding a clipboard like her life depended on it. Her eyes widened, her mouth moved, but no words came out. And then she whispered, barely audible over the music. Rebecca. That name. No one had said it in years. I didn't stop walking. I gave her the smallest nod, just enough to let her know she wasn't imagining me. At the far end of the ballroom, a quartet played a string arrangement of something trendy. Guests sipped champagne and posted selfies under a sign that read, "Forever starts today." I didn't belong in that world, not anymore. But I didn't need to belong, I just needed to be seen. And I was. A few heads turned, but people quickly looked away. Ridgefield had a code: never stare too long at anything you can't explain. Claire didn't look away. She followed me. I stepped outside to the garden terrace where the breeze smelled like rosemary and wealth. I didn't hear her footsteps, but I felt her presence before she spoke. "How?" she asked behind me. "How are you even here?" I turned slowly. Her face had changed since Georgetown. A little more contour, a little less innocence, but the warmth was still there under the shock. "I never died, Claire," I said quietly. "They just made it easier for everyone to believe I had." Her lips parted. "You were 18. Your father said." I know what he said. I looked out toward the field where white folding chairs formed two neat rows facing the altar. My mother was directing florists, oblivious. My father was inside, probably reviewing his speech one last time the same way he used to rehearse diagnoses. Claire stepped closer. "Caroline." "Why, now?" "Because lies have anniversaries, and today's theirs." She stared at me, unsure whether to be scared or impressed. Maybe both. I pulled an envelope from my clutch and handed it to her. It was thin, neat, and dangerous. Inside were copies of old medical reports. One had my father's signature. Another had the same signature forged over a DNR form dated 3 months later. Same pen stroke. Different patient. Claire held the papers like they might explode. "Is this real?" "Yes, and there's more." She looked up. "I'm not sure what you expect me to do." I didn't flinch, just watch. The sun dipped lower, casting amber light across the ceremony lawn. The guests began moving toward their seats, trailing laughter and linen. Claire stayed on the terrace, staring at the papers. Inside, someone tapped a glass for silence. I walked into the ballroom again, slower this time. My pulse was steady. My breath even. My father stood at the microphone. His suit was charcoal gray, his smile practiced. "Family, friends," he began. "Today we celebrate the joy of two hearts joining, but also the strength of the family that raised them." He went on, painting himself as a devoted father. Each word laid carefully like bricks in a wall he hoped no one would climb. I walked toward the front, past my mother's table. She saw me, and for a second her face cracked. Just slightly. But then she looked away, choosing denial, like it was an hors d'oeuvre she didn't care for. I stepped onto the stage. Gasps rustled through the crowd. Claire was in the back now, watching Frozen. The pianist stopped playing. Sienna looked up from her seat, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. I took the mic gently from my father, who looked at me like I'd just risen from a coffin. "Thank you," I said, turning to face the crowd. "I promise not to take long." I smiled at Sienna. To my sister I said, "Today is your day. You look beautiful, truly. And you deserve happiness." She blinked rapidly. My mother stood up half a step forward, then stopped. I continued. "I just wanted to say how grateful I am to be here. Not just in this building, but in this moment. In this truth." Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some were already whispering. My father's jaw tensed. I ended with one final line. "And I wish for everyone in this room something very simple. Courage. The courage to face the things we've all spent too long pretending not to see." I handed the mic back. Silence lingered. Then someone clapped. One person, then another. "Claire." My father tried to smile, but it cracked around the edges. I stepped down from the stage and walked past the front tables. My mother turned away, suddenly busy with her pearls. Sienna sat frozen, bouquet trembling in her lap. Claire walked slowly to the side of the ballroom where a tall man in a dark blazer was waiting. She slipped the envelope into his hand. And for the first time all day I truly smiled. Not because I was seen, but because someone else finally dared to look. I returned to my seat. The music started again, softer this time. But the atmosphere had shifted. You could feel it in the stillness between the notes. And that's when I saw Claire leave the table of honor, walk across the floor, and take a seat at the very back of the room. She wasn't just a maid of honor anymore, she was a witness, and I had lit the match. There was a flicker of movement near the double doors at the far end of the ballroom, the kind you notice only when everything else is far too still. Then came the voice. Firm, sharp, male. Dr. Warren Whitman. Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest. Gasps rippled across the room like a wave hitting a fragile dock. Wine glasses rattled, forks clattered against porcelain. The string quartet stopped mid-note, a dissonant screech of strings in the stunned silence. I stood at the edge of the stage, eyes locked on my father as two agents in dark suits moved down the aisle with practiced precision. Their jackets parted just enough for the glint of badges and holstered weapons to flash. He froze. For a second I almost believed he'd faint. His hands, those hands that had once cradled my baby sister and signed off on untold numbers of medical charts, hovered mid-air in disbelief. Then came the outburst. This is a mistake. There has to be some mistake. Agent Chen, calm and unreadable, stepped forward and read aloud from the warrant. Charges included obstruction of justice, conspiracy, falsification of medical records, and criminal coercion under federal health law. Every word felt like a cold nail driven into the coffin he had hammered shut around me a decade ago. Vivian collapsed into the nearest chair, pale as the table linens. Her hand clutched her chest like she was trying to keep her composure from spilling out in front of their precious guests. Sienna didn't move. She just stood there, bridal bouquet trembling in her hands, her face a porcelain mask of horror. Her groom looked around, clearly unsure whether to run or comfort her or pretend this wasn't happening. And I didn't blink. Dr. Warren Whitman. You are being taken into federal custody, Agent Chen repeated, his voice unwavering. The room erupted. People stood, whispered, scrambled for their phones. Some pressed back against the walls like the wedding was under siege. One guest filmed it all, phone raised in a trembling hand, no doubt already posting it to whatever platform would get them the most views. I stepped down from the stage, heels clicking against polished wood. Then my father turned. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck, jaw tight like he was chewing every ounce of rage he'd spent a lifetime hiding. This is your fault, all of this. He roared across the ballroom, voice cracking. You did this. I didn't flinch. I met his eyes, steady and calm. The truth did. The room went so quiet I could hear the whir of the overhead fans. Even the agents paused, surprised maybe, or perhaps just noting the crack in his carefully crafted image. He lunged toward me, or tried to. But the agents had him firmly by both arms before he could take more than one step. His cufflinks clattered to the floor as he struggled, and I watched one spin beneath the table where Sienna stood frozen. Get her out of here, he screamed at no one. She's sick, delusional. The irony nearly made me laugh. Instead, I just took a breath and stepped back, giving the agent space to escort him through the same aisle he had walked down for every gala, fundraiser, and charity dinner he had hosted in Ridgefield's most prestigious circles. As he passed, I saw it, the confusion, the fear. But no remorse. I turned to the guests. If anyone had hoped this would end quietly, their hopes died in that moment. I saw Aunt Lydia pressing her hand to her lips. I saw Mr. Garrison, my father's golfing buddy, sink low in his seat like he could vanish into the tablecloth. And I saw Claire. She was standing now, no longer behind the bridal table, but near the doorway, phone in hand, eyes locked on me. She nodded once. Vivian tried to follow the agents, but collapsed halfway down the aisle. A cousin caught her, steadied her. She was whispering something too soft to hear. Sienna finally moved. She dropped the bouquet. The white roses hit the ground, scattered across the marble like broken glass. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity is a luxury reserved for the innocent. I walked past the stunned crowd and toward the open doors. The afternoon light spilled in golden and unrelenting as if it had been waiting to expose everything we'd all tried to hide. And behind me, as the doors swung shut again, I heard only the silence of a family with no lies left to cling to. The hotel bar was nearly empty except for a young couple whispering in a corner booth and a bartender drying glasses beneath the muted hum of a baseball game on television. I took a seat near the back facing the door and ordered a coffee I wouldn't touch. My palms were cold. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out and packed with sand. But my voice, when the time came, would be steady. Vivian arrived 10 minutes late wearing a tailored cream blazer and sunglasses even though it was nearly 7 in the evening. She scanned the room and spotted me. For a moment, I thought she might turn around and walk right back out. But then she exhaled, adjusted her shoulders, and made her way to my table. She didn't sit immediately. "You look well," she said, tone unreadable. "You don't." Her mouth tightened. Slowly, she pulled out the chair across from me and lowered herself onto it like she didn't trust the furniture. "So, this is where you choose to humiliate us. After everything, on your sister's wedding day." I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. I didn't respond. I tapped the screen and pressed play. The recording began. Warren Whitman's voice, calm, certain, discussing forged medical records with a hospital administrator. The man sounded nervous. My father didn't. He sounded efficient. Familiar. There were names. Dates. Suggestions for how to word reports to avoid lawsuits. A plan to bury complaints. And one chilling phrase that still made my stomach knot, even after hearing it a dozen times. "As long as we control the narrative, the rest will fall in line." Vivian didn't flinch at first. She stared down at her untouched glass of wine. Then her hand began to tremble. She reached up, pulled off her sunglasses, and set them beside her napkin. "How long have you had that?" she asked. "Long enough to know you knew." She blinked. For a second, I saw her age catch up with her all at once. The sharpness in her cheekbones softened. Her eyes lost their edge. "I suspected," she whispered. "He always kept things from me, but I didn't ask because I knew I wouldn't like the answers. And then you. You told everyone. You exposed it. And I was terrified. Not for him, for us. Our name. Your sister's future. So you erased me." She didn't deny it. "I thought you'd come back. When things calmed down. But you disappeared, and we filled the silence the only way we could. By lying." Her hands clenched in her lap. "You buried me alive, Mom." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She glanced around the room as if trying to remember where she was, as if the walls might offer her an escape. "I'm sorry, Caroline. I truly am. But you have to understand, I didn't think I had a choice. I had a husband who could lose everything, a daughter applying to Yale, and you. You were always so strong. I thought you'd survive it. I did, but I lost years. I lost trust. I lost my home. I lost you." The tears finally slipped down her cheeks. "I was scared," she said. "I told myself it was just one time. One mistake. Then another. And another. I watched your father justify everything. And I let him. You could have left." She laughed, bitter and small. "He told me once. We don't abandon the family ship when it leaks. We patch it and pretend it's still seaworthy." I held on to that longer than I should have. I pulled a folder from my bag and handed it to her. Inside were copies of the federal investigation brief statements from patients like Linda and the whistleblower report I'd written. "These aren't just stories. They're people, real people he hurt. Some never got justice. Some never will. But I can't pretend anymore. And neither can you." She opened the folder with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the documents. Her shoulders sagged with every line. "Do you hate me?" I looked at her, at the woman who once brushed knots from my hair, who taught me to write thank you cards, who turned away when I needed her most. Number. "But I don't know how to love you the same way anymore." Her breath hitched. She looked like she wanted to reach across the table, but didn't. "Your father will never forgive you. He already tried to blame me. That was his last card. It didn't work. Vivian wiped her cheek and stood. I don't expect you to come back into this family, but maybe someday you'll come back into my life. I stood too. We'll see. She nodded, picked up the folder, and walked toward the door. Just before she reached it, she turned back. We buried you, Caroline. We held a memorial. People sent flowers. And all the while I knew you were out there somewhere breathing, hurting. I'm so sorry. We buried you while you were still alive. I stayed at the table long after she left, letting the weight of her words settle in my chest. And when I finally stepped outside into the cooling air, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like someone who had survived being erased and was starting to write herself back into the story. The train back to New York felt different this time. Not heavy, not rushed, not like an escape. Just quiet. The kind of quiet where things start to settle. I watched the green Connecticut trees blur past the window and thought of all the years I had spent shrinking myself just to survive. Now for once I wasn't trying to be smaller than the truth. I arrived at Penn Station just before sunset, the sky soft and golden. Claire had texted while I was still on the train. Thank you for not staying gone. That was all it said. But I read it 3 times. My apartment smelled like lavender and legal pads. I dropped my overnight bag, kicked off my shoes, and walked straight to the desk. The case files were still there. Linda's deposition. The nursing supervisor's email log. A manila folder marked redacted, internal review. All of it still open, still raw. I picked up my old journal, the one I had started at 19, and turned to the first page. The ink was faded but clear. I am not dead. I am only hidden. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That week messages started coming in. Linda wrote first. Just 2 words, we won. Then came Sharon, another woman we had helped after she lost custody because of a false psychiatric note written under pressure from a hospital administrator. She emailed a photo of herself at her son's baseball game, beaming. No words, just the photo. That was enough. Even Mr. Henley, the retired janitor who had testified about a pattern of shredded documents at his former hospital, sent a postcard from Florida. It had a flamingo on it. Still here, still testifying, he'd scribbled. I returned to work at the nonprofit office like nothing had changed, but everything had. The younger associates looked at me a little differently now. Not out of fear or reverence, but something closer to understanding. Like maybe I had been someplace they hadn't seen yet and somehow made it back. One afternoon, as I was making copies of a new class action brief, a junior staffer named Maya approached me. She hovered awkwardly near the copier, then asked almost in a whisper, "Was it true? The doctor they arrested. He was your father." I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I looked at her and smiled softly. Biologically, yes. But the person who raised me, taught me how to survive, how to fight, that was me. She blinked, nodded slowly, and walked away like someone who had just learned something useful, not just about me, but about the world. Later that evening, I sat on my fire escape with a glass of tea and listened to the city hum beneath me. Cars, sirens, laughter, a dog barking 2 floors down. All of it felt like life. And for the first time in a decade, I felt like I was allowed to be part of it. I thought about Ridgefield, about Vivian, about her face when I pressed play on that recording. How her spine seemed to collapse from the inside. She had known. Of course she had known. But hearing it, that was different. That made it undeniable. That made it real. Her words still echoed. We buried you while you were still alive. And her voice cracked when she said, I'm sorry, but the truth was I didn't need her apology. Not really. What I had needed was what she never gave me. Acknowledgement. And now I had that too. A week after the wedding, Claire emailed me a copy of her letter to the federal task force. She had detailed what she had witnessed over the years, including the times Warren had silenced hospital staff during board meetings, the unrecorded patient complaints, and the quiet settlements paid out through a legal shell fund. She closed the letter with a single line that made me sit very still. I do not know what forgiveness looks like, but I do know what truth sounds like now. And it sounds like her. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know what to say. Sometimes silence is the most honest thing we can give each other. I returned to the clinic 2 days later. Linda was there helping with intake forms. She smiled when she saw me and pulled me into a hug. A real one. The kind that says you've both seen the edge and come back with stories. I heard he's not getting bail, she said as we sorted folders. Not likely, I replied. Too many witnesses now. She chuckled, dark and dry. Took a whole damn decade, but karma finally punched his ticket. Justice, I corrected softly. Karma doesn't fill out subpoenas. We laughed, and it felt good. Right. Normal. That night, I pulled the journal back out and added a new entry. The 14th of July. I am not hidden anymore. I am whole. I paused, pen in hand, and added one more sentence. Not everyone who survives wants revenge. Some just want the truth to outlive the lie. The city lights outside my window flickered like tiny witnesses, and I let them keep watch while I closed my eyes and rested. Because surviving wasn't the ending. It was only the proof that the story had never really been theirs to erase. It was mine. And I was telling it now. The morning was still. Not quiet exactly, but still. The kind of stillness that came not from silence, but from peace. I sat on my balcony with a mug of chamomile tea, legs curled under me, and watched the city blink itself awake. Buses groaned down avenues. A jogger in a red hoodie passed 3 stories below. Somewhere, a dog barked at a passing siren. I breathed in slowly, let the steam warm my face. The weight that had lived in my chest for so long no longer pressed with the same heaviness. It was still there, but it wasn't suffocating me anymore. It had become something else. A reminder, not a wound. My phone vibrated on the table beside me. I picked it up, thumbed the screen, and stared at the short message blinking back at me. From Sienna Whitman, subject, I'm sorry, no one told me the full truth. I don't know if it matters now. But I'm sorry. That was it. No punctuation, no explanation. Just a string of fragile words like a paper crane sent across a storm. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her. Not anymore. I just didn't need anything from her. And maybe that was the clearest sign I had moved on. I let the phone fall face down on the table untouched. Inside my desk was a chaos of folders and sticky notes. I had started organizing the expansion case for the federal lawsuit. 23 new plaintiffs had come forward. Their stories were different, but the through line was painfully familiar. Muzzled complaints, altered charts, buried records. I was working with a team now. Real investigators. A trauma psychologist. A former medical board member who had quietly offered support after reading the article in the Post. Every one of them had shown up not to save me but to stand beside me. That made all the difference. I turned on my laptop and opened the shared case directory. The deposition schedule was color-coded. Interviews were being scheduled for Boston, Philadelphia, even as far as Tucson. We were building something big. Bigger than Warren. Bigger than me. There was a new message in the team folder from my paralegal. Ari Claire. She had requested to join the testimony panel for the ethics board hearing. She didn't want immunity. She wanted to speak on the record. I stared at the line she had written in the official form. I failed someone once. I won't do it again. I didn't know if we'd ever be close, but I respected her more than I ever had. That night, after I had scanned my last intake form and reviewed the notes from an interview in Ohio, I opened my voice diary. It had become a habit again, a ritual. A way to speak plainly to myself without judgment. I hit record. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Today, I read a deposition from a woman who said the moment she realized she wasn't crazy, wasn't weak, wasn't alone, was when she saw my name in the press. Not the headline, not the photo, just the name. It meant something to her that I was still here. I paused. I think maybe that's why I came back. Not to take revenge, not even to win, but to be seen. To say with my presence that they didn't get to finish writing my ending. Outside the window, a plane blinked across the sky, moving somewhere unseen. I lost a lot. I continued, quieter now. Time, family. Parts of myself I'm still learning how to trust again. But I also gained something I never expected. Proof that surviving isn't the end. It's the beginning of choosing every day to exist clearly. I drew in a breath deep and full. I didn't return for revenge. I returned to live. Clearly. Without fear. Without shame. And never again to be erased. I hit stop. The file saved automatically into a folder marked truth. I closed my laptop and stood stretching against the tension in my shoulders. The city outside was glowing, now orange and lavender melting into the horizon. Somewhere in that light, someone else might be waking up to their own story, finding their own name again. I stood for a long time watching the world move without permission, just because it could. And for the first time, I wasn't chasing it. I was part of it. I was here, still. If this story found its way into your heart, if you saw even a piece of yourself in the quiet battles or hard-won truths, I hope you'll leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to stay with us. Because there are more stories to tell. And every voice matters. Especially yours.